AI is no longer just a buzzword in pharma. In fact, it's quietly reshaping how drugs are discovered, developed, and distributed. Today, we have three thought leaders who are leading this transformation from the front. Sujay Shetty of PwC, who tracks where this industry is going, Phanimitra B of Dr. Reddy's, who's building it from within, and Ramesh Swaminathan of Lupin, who's actually funding and scaling it. It's Monday, the 6th of April. I'm Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief. Gentlemen, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Starting with Sujay, so I'd just like to cite one of your studies which finds that 53% of pharma finance leaders are actually prioritizing AI. Now, that's a great number, but as with all of AI, the question always is it actual transformation or is it just experiment?
I think in our experience and in the same research, I think we've moved past the initial days, which was a couple of years ago when the excitement of AI came to the fore. So I would say the experimentation stage is largely coming to a close. There's greater understanding of what technology and foundational technologies are needed. There's been terrific advancements in agentic software, as you know. And I think people are really trying to put those experiments to good use, i.e. try and transform certain functions. I wouldn't call it still at the enterprise level, trying to turn AI native. But I think large organizations appreciating the fact that they're large and it takes time to turn around. I think there's a lot of energy now going in building specific AI roadmaps from the experimentation stage to transformation. So I really think we're at an inflection point, and it's really very exciting in the way industry leaders like Ramesh and Phani are driving it.
Right. Ramesh and Phani, if I could have some initial thoughts from you on the impact that AI is making, not just in terms of costs and manpower, but also efficiency and in several aspects of drug discovery development.
I agree with what Sujay was saying. This is actually going beyond just an incremental technology platform. I would say it's actually an economic shift. It is going to be transforming the business itself. The transformation could be pretty dramatic. The kind of benefits that you would potentially get from this would be humongous vis-a-vis anything else it had done in the recent past. And for sure, people who don't experiment or don't work with it would perhaps be left behind.
Funny?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it as an impact across the board, all the way from clinical, from a drug development perspective into how we run our manufacturing operations and quality, which is very critical for the Indian pharma in general, as well as how we are seeing our commercial go-to-market models evolve with the application of AI. So the breadth of this technology and the impact is quite phenomenal from that perspective. It is also quietly reshaping how the jobs were done, how the work flows between functions and across the organization. So it is the bigger impact we would see is also in how organizations suddenly revisit how they are structured and how they're designed from an operating model perspective. So quite exciting in terms of where we are headed with this.
Right, Phani, if I can throw a counter question at you, if you can just expand on the drug discovery bit. I mean, in terms of, say, better site selection, sharper patient recruitment, identifying the right leads.
This is a very, very interesting and important area because, a significant chunk of time for a life sciences pharma company is actually spent on the drug discovery, and getting that right is essentially critical to how the entire downstream operations and the value creation actually happens. The amount of time spent in the product selection to the actual development and clinical studies or biostudies equivalent, and then the go-to-plant processes in terms of how you scale up that product from a bench to the manufacturing site itself. The entire spectrum is seeing a significant change with the interventions of AI. One of our initiatives is on the Origin.ai, the CRDMO business that Dr. Reddy's runs. We actually have now started leveraging AI to help the innovative pharma, with the hit identification, lead identification kind of processes, but also in the traditional small molecule business within the larger Dr. Reddy's environment in the generic sense as well. We are seeing significant opportunities in terms of how we are identifying the routes of synthesis, how we are identifying the drug excipient compatibility, how we are looking at the digital twins for how some of these products would actually show up in the plant itself, and so on. But the biggest value creators is in taking the product from the labs to the sites, both in terms of how the technology transfer used to happen from R&D to the site, as well as the getting it first time right when we actually scale up these products in the site as well. On the clinical development, on the trials itself, when it comes to site selection or patient recruitment, etc. Even before that, a lot of in silico modeling of in vitro behavior or in vivo behavior is actually a significant opportunity. While we are very early in this, imagine the opportunity that will create for us as an industry if you are able to work with the regulatory teams and figure out a way to get waivers in a scientifically proven way to use models for actually getting bio waiver, for instance, right? I think it's a very exciting space, very, very early. I think it's still day zero on the AI world, but this is one part of the value chain I'm very, very excited about for what's to come.
Interesting you say this, and I'll toss it over to Sujay. Now, if we talk about global companies, there are several, like say Merck, who say that their R&D has actually increased by several multiples thanks to their adoption of AI. Is this like a new benchmark or a playbook which can be adopted by Indian companies as well, or are these companies just outliers?
Two parts to that question, Anirban. One is, of course, from the point of view of R&D, that is the definitive use case, especially the upstream part. For a long while, machine learning did not quite succeed in drug discovery. The pattern recognition in order to maximize, as hit to lead, as Funny said, lead optimization did not bear as much fruit until AlphaFold came along, which is probably as transformational, if not more transformational than ChatGPT in terms of protein characterization, structures that collapsed years into months, into weeks, into days. So that gave like really good wings. And you saw in the last few months, startup drug discovery companies in Silicon Valley getting funded up to $1 billion without even having any products in the marketplace and tools. So clearly the industry, the stock markets expect a lot. They expect this time of 12 years to be crunched down much faster. It depends on how the regulatory bodies keep up with this phenomenal onslaught that will come from AI. On the Indian side, really offers a way to jumpstart or leapfrog because this democratizes innovation in ways that we've not seen before. So it will not be unusual for Indian companies, generic or otherwise, startup or otherwise, trying to be much more innovative because the tools that we'll have at our disposal actually inverts the economics of the game in terms of drug development, in terms of throughput screening, combinatorial chemistry, etc. So I think, yes, the stat that you alluded to double since adopting AI, my sense is that will triple and quadruple. And given what's going on in China in terms of innovation, which is using AI at scale, I think we will see much more of that. Again, big inflection point from an R&D perspective.
Ramesh, coming to you, we've covered the expanse of AI. I'd like to talk to you about use cases a bit. As far as my research goes, Lupin is piloting Gen AI across commercial manufacturing and quality. So there's going wide and there's going deep. Which one do you think is the more, prudent way to go about this?
Well, actually, you heard it right. We are actually looking at AI across the entire spectrum of the value chain. It's manufacturing, it is certainly QA, it's selling and distribution, and across the support functions as well, HR, finance, legal, and the like as well. So clearly, it's adoption across the entire support functions and the value chain. It's a difficult question to answer as to whether it should be mile deep in a particular function or should it be wide enough. One fundamental thing that one should realize is the fact that data in most companies is actually spread across several repositories, so to speak. In my own company, in my own experience, we actually find it spread across 90 to 100 repositories, so to speak. Getting this architecture, whereby you're able to connect all the data repositories is very important. So it's not as though you can just look at manufacturing and then after you reach a particular level, move on to another function and the like. You might not necessarily take up all the cases, but you really identify the cases that will deal with the biggest value. Pick 5, 6 in every function and then take it along and then move on to the second phase, again connecting all of this data. And that would be important. Whilst you do that, I think it's equally important to actually have an AI council to kind of prioritize this based again on, in fact, on the value that it delivers. And you should be concerned about, in fact, an ethical process in the whole game in terms of making sure that there is no bias, because the usage of data is very important. A very important component of the whole thing, of course, has to be a human in the loop, because at the end of the day, accountability is not divisible. And as you would also appreciate, AI has this habit of hallucinating. So it's important to actually make sure that the results are reliable. And for sure, given the data sensitivity that all of us are aware of, data privacy becomes very important. So it's important that that we kind of recognize all of this when we go in for the use cases.
Got it. Okay, very interesting points from you there. One, of course, that it's more prudent to go wide than necessarily deep, or it can be both at the same time, which is very different from the tech interviews or the AI investor interviews that we often listen to or conduct, where they say that it's always better to go deep. That's very interesting. You've delved into responsible use of AI, which is a space where I'd like to circle back to and hear from Phani and Sujay as well. But before that, I'd like to delve a little deeper on use cases. Now, Lupin's Life platform is doing AI-led cardiac monitoring across 380 Indian districts. Do you think patient-facing AI is where Indian pharma can actually leapfrog global peers in the coming years?
I would certainly say yes. So speaking about, in fact, a life example, we are actually using it across the entire spectrum of the value chain. Firstly, starting with, in fact, the transcription of various documents. So even before we onboard any patient, there's several documents that we collect from him, because really we need to get a lot of patient-centric data. And a lot of this could potentially be done using AI. Then the call script. So when you were speaking about, talking to him and understanding, in fact, how do you actually respond to questions, or for that matter, getting the most out of that particular interview, scripting, in fact, AI is very useful when we actually have to monitor a lot of the clinical parameters of the patient, so to speak. So we use this data to warn us from time to time about the things that are going awry. So we're using it across the entire value chain in our life cardiovascular platform that we have, and it's turning out to be pretty useful.
Okay. Sujay, one question on Indian GCCs, and they are practically running AI for a lot of global drug makers. How important do you think GCCs are in this space? Are they decision makers yet, or are they just execution points?
No, it would be a mischaracterization to say they're simply execution points. For many reasons, the GCCs have acquired increasing sophistication, and that's part of the reason why you read so much about it in the media in terms of R&D, product development, product design. It's no different in pharma. I was surprised to see many of the innovator pharma who don't have much commercial presence in India transfer some very sensitive development functions to India in areas like biostatisticians or program leads, program designers. These are very complex skills in clinical trials, in drug development, the D part, which takes enormous amount of investment. So they, in addition, in many cases have transferred large global roles also to India. So I would say, in terms of execution versus decision makers, I would clearly say a lot is expected from GCC, from the parents or the sponsors. However, the wider question is not that. The wider question is, with the developments in AI, with agentic software, and now these recent developments with Claude and what it can and cannot do, how can they be ahead while taking decisions? What value can they add? I think that would be maybe the more pertinent question in times to come.
Right. Okay. Let's come to challenges, policy, and what else can be done. Question to Sujay. Now, my question is on data, and I won't make the mistake of saying data is more precious than oil now, given what's going on. Oil is oil, and oil, in fact, drives data, as we see. But one characteristic of Indian data across industries is how scattered and unorganized it is. India has 1.4 billion people, but a very little structured public health data. Is that one of the biggest challenges that you see when it comes to AI in pharma as well?
Yeah, I think public health data, its use and its fragmentation is not unique to India. Even the UK NHS, there was an article in the UK media about a former UK Prime Minister pleading that 20 years worth of oncology data that sits at the UK NHS could be much more gainfully used with AI. I think where India can score would be the developments that are taking place with National Health Authority, with the National Digital Health Mission, whereby we're putting all of those repositories, on the net, which allows better discovery of service providers, more transference of records from small and medium service providers, which allow more case studies, medical histories to be loaded up, of course, for a fee, data coming out of the Ayushman Bharat. There's an opportunity for India to, given that it's building what it calls a health stack in a similar manner to the UPI stack, to see where that goes. Our hope is that it will give more and more flip to startups and others to access data. If you take a step back and you see the way 3 large countries have used data, if you take a look at the US, data certainly has been used a lot in the laissez-faire mode, which is very entrepreneurial. People access data which is readily available to form startups, companies, solve problems. China has typically used it for the most part for control and surveillance. facial recognition, large-scale deployment, whether it was COVID or pandemic or crime, etc. India, for the most part, if you look at UPI and others, has used it for public good. Some of that work is going on in the state governments as well for risk pooling in terms of bringing together, say, onco data, others, but they're very small at cottage industry level. But I think this National Health Authority's digital health mission, the smaller health service providers transfer their data on in terms of who they are, what they do, what records they put in, will allow for some level of public data to be available for, say, drug discovery or treatment of protocol, standard of care to be applied for.
Okay. Funny, data discipline is equally important. Ramesh spoke about hallucinations. In fact, bad data fed into AI is worse than no AI, actually. What are your views on this?
Mostly, I agree. And there is a reason I say mostly as well. But, the definition of bad data is also changing. Usually we used to associate bad data with accurate data or data that is trustworthy. But increasingly, like what Ramesh hinted, bad data can also be the one that has not enough width or depth, right? And that's where the definition of what is good data is changing across organizations and enterprises as the maturity increases and the demands from what AI can do increases. So I would place that badness of data on a spectrum, if you will, Anirban, so that we can place it correctly. But to your point, organizations that have invested into data discipline around data governance would see much significant gains from this kind of revolution than the ones that have not invested in it in the past. So I think that is a significant differentiator. But what is good about the new generative AI and the new set of tools that are coming in is it's also becoming increasingly easier to manage your data if you actually have the right will for it, and the right understanding of what you need around it. So there have been significant advancements in terms of technologies coming in from the cloud providers, on all the hyperscaler stacks, where you can actually manage your data much better now, characterize your data much better now. So you can profile your data much easier with generative AI tools and so on, which used to take a lot of time in the past. So I think it's better late than never, but organizations should get their act together around data if they really want to take advantage of this. And the other important thing is also when you see a lot of unstructured data, images, documents, voice notes, and things that organizations never cared for as much as they cared for, structured quantitative data sets that they were using for, financial reporting or otherwise, right? That is a hidden gold mine for organizations to actually tap into and take advantage of if they want to really leverage AI for impact.
Okay. Let me come to the financial aspect. Cost of manufacturing when it comes to AI, how real and tangible a challenge do you think it is?
I think the cost of AI in manufacturing, Anirban, falls in two buckets, right? I think to the point that Ramesh was mentioning, one is the investment that goes into foundations for data, which is what I was saying, whether your MES systems are in place, whether you're able to capture data from some of your manufacturing operations well enough, right? So that is the investment on what I call as foundations for data, so that you can actually build solutions for AI, right? And that is the second cost. So I think it's important for organizations to look at both these points when it comes to measuring the cost of data. The second point I'm going to make is sometimes cost has to be seen in the perspective of the outcome. People are reluctant to take it on the budget because they don't fully understand the potential value that it can generate. So, if you're generating, $2 on one versus $10 on one doesn't change, but the cost of that $1 actually, feels very different when you actually see the 10 on the table. If you don't choose your use cases correctly, and if you're not training your AI guns at the right spots, it is always going to feel very costly. You're increasing the yield by, yield and savings from yield by, let's say, 50 crores. The 1 CR would look cheaper when you actually are sure that it's going to deliver some value like that.
I have a couple of challenges here also. Essentially, we also find that technological obsolescence being what it is, what we have actually implemented yesterday could become obsolete tomorrow. And I'm speaking about, so you have generative AI, agentic AI, and tomorrow it could be something else. The speed of obsolescence being what it is, what you have just created at a humongous cost yesterday could become outdated. The second, we also have this dilemma about whether you actually should be buying or building one. So essentially, you might actually end up building one, but you might come across a situation where the existing platforms are kind of upgraded and they're coming out with embedded programs. It could actually capture exactly the kind of things that you would like your AI model to do. So you are left with this question: did we do the right thing in actually going and investing in into something which is going to be anyway coming as part of an existing platform, be it SAP or be it Aviva or something else for that matter.
Can I wear my journalist's hat for 1 minute and ask you to underscore that obsolescence bit you said with an example that Lupin has actually faced?
Oh, it's across, So we, for example, wanted to look at a new product for our sales guys. We just found that platforms like Salesforce.com are coming out with, in fact, algorithmic, AI algorithms which could sit on their existing platform. So building a new one might not necessarily have been the right thing to do. And that's true across, in fact, I would come across this in finance as well. I might build a product and to find that SAP is coming out with something which sits on their existing platform. So it's just that they are a little behind the curve, but I would have spent humongous monies creating something which could potentially become par for the course with an existing platform.
Got it. Final few questions. One important bit on AI governance and policy. Let's start with Phani. The government is taking a lot of initiatives, in fact, in the health industry as well. Sahi and Bodh are two initiatives, a national AI governance framework for health. How do you see this, and how do you see the importance of AI in policy and what's actually being done on ground in India in terms of AI governance?
Yeah, I think these, they've been cooking for a bit. They got announced as a part of the India AI Summit very recently as well. But the way I see it, while Sahi is more of a guidelines policy document, what I am more excited about is actually Bodh. It is probably the first of its kind probably across the world when it comes to benchmarking for health itself, right? Open data sets do exist, but benchmarking pipelines for open data sets in healthcare and AI is actually very, very new. And that way, you really have to appreciate the IIT Kanpur folks as well as the government to actually think about something like this. It's way ahead of time, and I'm sure it's going to get better with time. And it is first of its kind for probably three reasons that I have seen early on, right? One is it's probably one of the very few sovereign offerings, coming from the government, not private hospital-led, like a John Hopkins datasets or a Stanford Meds datasets and stuff like that, which are very therapy-specific as well as private efforts in some form, right? So it's a sovereign effort. It's different that way. The second is it provides many of the AI startups a set of structured and validated datasets that and it also goes beyond datasets to what we call as a end-to-end benchmarking pipeline. And when it comes to healthcare data, a lot of this, we've talked about federated learning, federated model evaluation, and things like that. This is a space that is actually ahead of the curve from those principles as well. But more importantly, the question that you've talked about very early on, and Ramesh touched upon it lightly, going beyond the metrics, right? The typical metrics for a good AI platform when we develop it either in-house or otherwise is usually just model accuracy. But this framework eventually also brings along 5-6 more parameters that are critical. I personally love the fact that they are actually including fairness, which is critical to balance accuracy across a very diverse set of data sets. Just given the heterogeneity of India's population and health profiles, that's a significantly forward-looking thinking. The second one is also, while there are the 7, there's one around the robustness and efficiency, because a lot of these models have to operate in what we call as low fidelity conditions. You're operating in a clinic, in a rural area, you see diagnostics, etc. There is a metric that actually tracks for robustness and efficiency. That's again a very good thing. The third one, which I think many of the doctors, some of my friends actually liked, is about the clinical efficiency. There's a framework to actually not just override the human, but actually bake in the expert doctor's opinion into the clinical efficiency metrics. So while there are tons of things that are good with it, I am personally very excited that we actually launched something like Bodh. It is a great way for healthcare AI startups eventually prove that they are beating a benchmark or meeting a benchmark, and a very public leaderboard kind of thing actually creates that competition. When you just make the leaderboard public, it just brings out the best of everybody because they're competing against each other. The benchmark metrics are out there for everybody to see and so on. To think about it for healthcare AI, I think is a very forward-looking step. I just hope that it sustains and grows from here.
You're right. That's a lot of takeaways in that one answer. Quick rapid fire, 1 or 2 lines answer from each of you. Sujay, if there's one thing you think that Indian pharma needs to do to not fall behind the world in AI, what would that be?
So I would say that prepare an AI roadmap, look at a small set of priority outcomes, fund the portfolio to scale those winners, modernize only those that are necessary by way of data and platforms, and provided a very targeted workforce in reskilling and governance.
And Ramesh and Phani, a common question to the two of you. India is the generic pharmacy of the world. Can AI make it the innovation pharmacy of the world as well, Ramesh?
I clearly think it would happen. There are, of course, this is not the only thing that needs to be done. There's a host of other regulations that we'll have to follow. Clearly, clinical trials and the like, having the ecosystem for that is very important. So clearly, there needs to be a lot of changes in the way we actually go about expediting our clinical trials processes and the like as well. And I think the government has got a very big role to play in this.
Right, absolutely. Phani, last word.
I think the innovation space is quite big a word, and multiple factors at play for us to actually get to that dream state that I think pretty much all of us are talking about in every conference that we get to now. I think this is an opportunity for organizations to think of this as a great tool, but like I said, train the guns at the right choke point, right value creating lever, and it can play a significant role in driving us towards innovation.
Right. From potential to use cases to challenges to governance, we've covered quite a wide expanse of subtopics in this whole umbrella topic of AI in pharma. Sujay, Ramesh, Phani, thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Vinay Joshi and Rajas Naik, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. Keep listening to The Morning Brief wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned.